Good evening, everyone. It is 5:30. It is Tuesday, September 17th, 2024, in the council chambers, and we are going to call this meeting of Finance, Budget, and Personnel to order. First thing we are going to ask for is identify any conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest? Seeing none. Moving on to number 3, citizens' comments. Are there any citizen comments? Any citizen comments? One more time, any citizen comments tonight? Okay, we will move on to item number 4, consent agenda. In that agenda, there will be the minutes of the September 3rd, 2024 meeting, as well as bills and payroll. Do I have a motion for that?
I'll move to enter in the meeting minutes.
A second.
Right, we have a motion by Mr. Rigel, a second by Mr. Marshall. Any discussion? Right, please vote. Please vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Any noes?
Aye.
All right, all in favor. We will move on to number 5. We can do that. Number 6. Okay, request to recommend council approval of changes to the current agreement with Aging and Disability Resource Center of Central Wisconsin, the ADRC-CW, to allow the Meals on Wheels program to move into the 2nd Street Community Center, introduced by Justin Casperson, Parks and Recreation Director, presented by a representative of the ADRC-CW. Oh, we don't have Justin Casperson. Okay, Amanda Bruce. All right.
Hello, I'm not Justin. I'm Amanda. I'm Amanda, the Recreation Manager in the Park and Rec Department. We're located in the 2nd Street Community Center, where we currently have the Senior Center, and then the ADRC Meals on Wheels, the ADRC Congregate Meal Program is housed at our location Monday through Friday. The program is going very well, and they are actually looking for a new location for their Meals on Wheels program. There is a contract involved with all of that, so there are some changes that are made as a request in your packet. And I'm going to hand it off to Ms. Rhonda, who is in charge of the Meals on Wheels program with the ADRC.
Good evening. I'm Rhonda James from the ADRC of Central Wisconsin, and I'm the Nutrition Program Director. I came before this council 5 years ago now, almost 6. So we could ask for formal permission to start our senior dining services at the 2nd Street Community Center. It's been going really well. I don't remember things unless I have a couple notes in front of me. So as Amanda said, we have, I think we have just a really nice collaboration with the Parks and Rec Department among our staff and our volunteers. And it's an exciting thing for me to go there and see all that's happening on a day where we're serving meals, which is Monday through Friday. So looking back at 2023 numbers, we served 213 unique individuals senior dining meals at that location, which I'm surprised by that number, to be honest. And that was just over 4,800 meals in that calendar year. So if you're not familiar with the Aging and Disability Resource Center, and specifically the Senior Nutrition Program, the goals of the Senior Nutrition Program, which is senior dining, where seniors age 60 plus come together, that's the only eligibility requirement, is age. It doesn't matter how much is in their bank account or how much their monthly income is. Suggested contribution of $4.50 a meal. Meals on Wheels is for people who are 60 and older, primarily homebound, struggle to prepare their own meals. So similar population, but just a bit different. Our goals, this comes from the feds, who primarily fund our program. Reduce hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition. Promote socialization. There is a lot of that happening at 2nd Street Community Center. And then promote health and well-being by providing educational opportunities, disease prevention, get moving and doing things, even though you might not be 21 anymore. So back in July, we formally came to the Parks and Rec Committee. Our executive director, Mike Ray, did that. And his request was similar to what I'm asking this evening, and that is, and they approved it unanimously, if I remember correctly. What we're looking to do is, with the infrastructure we've created in the kitchen at Second Street Community Center, brought in quite a bit of equipment back in 2019 to make that happen, and we funded that. We want to expand just a little bit our footprint, package our Meals on Wheels at the Second Street Community Center location. So that looks like right around 300 hot meals go out the door every week. About 175, 200 frozen meals go out the door. So just like our senior dining meals, the caterer brings the food to the building in pans. It's already prepared. And then we package in containers, heat seal them, organize them by delivery route that go out into the greater Marshfield, Wood County, and Southwest Marathon County communities. The goal of the program is to keep older adults living at home independently. And let me tell you, there are a number of people who have gotten our Meals on Wheels for a number of years. One fella has gotten meals from us for at least 22 years. It's kept him in his home. So that's the goal of our program. So a little bit more equipment is what we intend to bring in to make this happen. Extra freezer, refrigerator, a little bit of workspaces, some delivery bags, some storage is needed. We're essentially looking at the same footprint as we use now, just kind of shuffling around what we have and moving things to make space for this a little bit extra. So our formal ask is for approval of an amended or edited budget, agreements, which is in your packets today. So I just wanted to ask if there's any questions for us.
Are there any questions for Rhonda? Thank you for your presentation. So this is, the recommendation is council approval. Do we have a motion?
I move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Marshall, a second by Mr. Rigel. Any discussion? Oh, yes.
Hey, I'd just like to add, these types of agreements are typically run past the city attorney, and the city attorney's been ill lately, so he hasn't had a chance to look at this. So I would say if this body wants to recommend approval for the council, that it's just noted that between now and the council meeting on Tuesday, that it gets that cursory review from the city attorney. And if there are any questions, we'll let you know, not expecting any, but just wanted to put that in there so that that's a part of this approval.
Great. Mr. Marshall, do you wish to amend that motion?
No, still move to approve, please.
All right. Let's vote then. All ayes.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
All right, item number 7. Request to recommend council approval of resolution number 2024-40, exemption from Wood County library tax, presented by Jill Porter, Library Director.
Well, this is my annual easy one. Thank you, Vice Chair. Where I come to you and point out that Wisconsin statutes allow municipalities with libraries to exempt their taxpayers from paying the county library tax, because in Marshfield and as in 6 other municipalities in the county, more is apportioned to the library than they would receive through the Wood County library tax. So I am seeking approval of the exemption for the following year, and this will, I assume, be approved by the library board on Thursday.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Jill?
I'll move to approve.
Approve. Any second?
Second.
All right. Any questions for Jill? All right. All in favor? Please say
Aye.
aye. All right, that motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 8. request to recommend council authorization to refill 2 vacant firefighter paramedic positions presented by Everett Mueller, Fire Chief.
All right, good evening. With the retirement of Jody Clements on September 3rd, 2024, and the resignation of Anthony Halloran on September 4th, 2024, the department currently has 2 vacant positions. The vacant positions that we are requesting permission to fill will be for 2 recruit firefighters. There is a correction on the memo you have in front of you in your packet. It states that we currently have 30 line personnel. We have recently offered a position to a candidate, and that candidate has accepted. We'll be operating with 31 line personnel very soon, once all the pre-employment items are complete. The 2 positions that were not filled in 2022 will still remain open. For today, I'm respectfully requesting permission to refill the 2 vacant positions created by interim Chief Clements' retirement and firefighter paramedic Halloran's resignation. I'd be happy to answer any questions the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee may have.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Right, I have a motion by Mr. Rigel, a second by Mr. Varsho. Do we have any questions? All right, seeing none. All those in favor, please say
Aye.
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 That motion passes.
Thank you.
Item number 9, request to recommend council approval of 2025 ambulance service contracts, presented by Jennifer Selensky, Finance Director.
Good evening. This is an item you saw a couple of weeks ago. It relates to the ambulance contracts that we have with our neighboring communities. And this body had recommended, or council had recommended, that we go back and revise one piece of the agreement. That piece of the agreement talked about where towns and villages would pay their contracted amounts of uncollectible charges within their boundaries up to $3,000 per year. Council recommended that we take out that cap, and any charges that were deemed uncollectible would be due from those towns and villages. We went back to the Fire and Police Commission on September 12th of 2024, and they did agree to remove the cap. And so with that, I would ask your approval to send this agreement on to the Common Council.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, Mr. Varsho moves to approve. Mr. Rigel seconds. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 That motion passes. Thank you. Okay, Jennifer, you're still up. Request to recommend council approval of revised policy number 4.320, utility transfers for general government utilization, presented by Jennifer Selensky, Finance Director.
Okay, this is another item that you saw 2 weeks ago at the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee. It was a request to sort of clarify policy number 4.320. Previously, as the policy stands now, the dividend that the city receives from Marshfield Utilities is deposited in the general fund with a transfer to the Economic Development Fund for its current year budget. The policy revision that I recommended we change was to deposit the dividend received from Marshfield Utilities directly into the Economic Development Fund, knowing that council would have full approval to approve the budget, and if necessary, approve any transfers out of the fund. This recommendation passed Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee on September 3rd, but was pulled from the consent agenda at council last week and voted to be sent back to this body for your decision. So if you want to leave the policy as is, meaning the utility dividend is deposited in the general fund, there's nothing more to do this evening. But if it is your intention that the dividend should be deposited directly into the Economic Development Fund, then that would be my recommendation that we revise this policy.
Do you have any motions? Okay, do we have any questions or discussion?
Are we able to ask questions without a motion in a second?
If no one's wanting to make a motion, which it seems there was no motion, you can have some discussion to determine what it is you would like to do.
So right now, the money comes in and goes right to the general fund.
Correct.
And that's what this policy is.
It is the policy that is currently on the books that was approved in 2023. Because you recently approved and council approved a budget resolution to take the extra unanticipated earnings from the dividend and transfer them to the economic development for use in the economic development fund, my intention of changing the policy was to align that thought process that we really want to use those dividend monies for economic development, and it made logical sense to put them in that fund specifically. However, still knowing that council could transfer those monies to other funds, not just the general fund, as requests came up through the budget resolution process.
Okay, so go back because you said a lot there, and
Sure.
you're aligning this with what the council approved.
As a budget resolution, so in 2024, we thought the dividend would be somewhere around $287,000. And we put that in the budget, in the general fund, and then transferred whatever the budget was for the economic development fund, somewhere near that, to the 205 fund. When we actually got our dividend payment, it was $492,000, meaning that was unanticipated revenue in the general fund that could, at that point, have been used to simply fall to the bottom fund balance of the general fund or be used to plug gaps in the general fund's budget. With the budget resolution, we transferred the difference between what we thought we were going to receive and what we actually received back over to the economic development fund so that it could be appropriated from there as council deemed.
Okay, so the whole council approved that budget resolution. Now you're trying to align this
policy
with
that.
what the council approved at that point.
Correct.
Okay.
Mrs. Spiros?
But isn't the policy already approved? Didn't we already do this once? We just brought it back and pulled it from the minutes?
Well, when it was pulled from council, it did not pass to amend the policy, and it was directed to be returned back to this body for future evaluation.
Okay, so, and we didn't get anything from this body, so I'll move that it goes back to the common council for approval.
I'm going to second that.
Right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion or question?
I got some over here. So the 205 fund does has restrictions as far as how that money can be spent, correct?
As a special revenue fund called the Economic Development Fund, the restriction would be for the purpose of the fund. So economic development as however defined.
Right, okay. So as it stands right now, without unchanged, the money comes into the general fund, and then if we have excess or anticipated revenue, then we dispose of that as needed, as you said before, either staying in the general fund or passed out to plug gaps or to go to the 205 fund, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so if we're to change the policy and the same incident happens where we end up with unanticipated revenue in the 205 fund, now we have to be able to designate if we want to move that money to a different fund or to plug the gap. We have to justify that as economic development, correct?
Correct. So in this case, we received $492,000, the economic development fund's budget, let's say, was $300,000 for 2024. Whatever excess was available just falls to the fund balance of the economic development fund at that point for you either to appropriate through a budget resolution in 2024 or save it for a future year.
Right, so then my question then becomes this: why would we start off by dropping it into a fund that has more restrictions than another one?
If your intention is to use the money for economic development fund, in my mind, that was the logical place, because we really separate our economic development spending within that fund. In the general fund, our economic development monies are put towards salaries, let's say for a community development director or anything else. If that director were to engage in a professional service of some kind for a study, that might be used out of general fund money and thereby that theoretically that dividend, right? As we move forward, we are looking to consider putting some of those expenditures in the 205 already as a new budget item for 25 and going forward. So this dividend would then just be more matched with the economic development activities of the city.
Right, but we're still going to have transfers going both ways, right? From the general fund potentially to the 205 or vice versa, depending on where the money gets deposited.
Correct.
Right, so then once again, why are we putting into the fund that has restrictions as opposed to the other one? It'd make it easier and more flexible for us to spend money out of the general fund, would it not?
It has to be budgeted either way.
Right.
So, if you can go either way. Economic development is broadly defined currently. So in my mind, it's maybe not more restrictive than putting it in the 205 than in the general fund.
Granted, it's not a high hurdle. I mean, you're right. It's just a matter of doing it, but still, nonetheless, we're now making more work for us to, justify being spent as economic development, whereas in the general fund, we wouldn't have to do that at all.
Well, your budget line items in the Economic Development Fund are pretty defined, either as a professional service or facade grant program or a contribution to outside entities. So, I mean, in my mind, it was just a simple alignment.
Right, but I guess the concern here is the excess, the unanticipated windfall or unanticipated revenue. That's the part that we're concerned about, not the budgeted line items, because like you said, that's to be budgeted regardless of what fund it's in.
Right, but if we put it all in 205, it just resides there. We're more unlikely to transfer it to the general fund to support some sort of operation, given our past experience, than to make a request from the 205 fund to fund something outside of its fund. In past practice. So take for an example, we did in TIF District 12, we were certifying the sites, Economic Development Fund. Funds were used to help that project. So a transfer was made out of that fund and into the TIF District Fund to support that economic development activity there. So in my mind, it's just keeping economic development in the 205 and deciding from there where to distribute it rather than potentially getting lost in the general fund. But it's certainly up to you.
Okay, Ms. Spears has been patiently waiting, so I'll cede the floor to her.
Oh, I was already off mute. So to me, what this does, and this is how I kind of reasoned it out in my head, because it sort of is splitting hairs, but with it being in the 205, then every time that we want to make pay for something out of that 205 fund and transfer it into the general to pay for something or whatever, it's going to be brought to our attention every single time. It's not going to be buried in the budget that's presented in October that's, 1,000 pages long and spent on something that we didn't intend for it to be spent on, that while it has to be spent on economic development, like Jennifer said, economic development is pretty widespread anymore. I mean, even at the point, I think at one meeting, Steve said you could technically fill potholes and that would be considered economic development. So for me, this is an oversight thing. I don't look at it as a lot of work. It just gets added to an agenda and you approve it or just say no, the same as any other thing. But this gives us more control in making sure that the economic development fund, which is what it was intended for, this overage was intended for economic development, is indeed spent on what we would consider worthwhile economic development projects rather than just some random, budget item. So it's a checks and balance for me.
Any other questions? Oh, Mr. Reichel?
Right, I guess two things on that. One, when the Economic Development Board was still functioning, the utility representative there on at least two occasions, possibly three if my memory serves, said that the utility dividend no longer had any attachment to economic development. It could be spent at will. So if he was incorrect in stating that, that'd be good to know. If he was correct, then that's pretty impactful for our pretty skinny budget, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I think that, you know, he was making clear the fact that there is no restriction for that purpose. That would still be their intent. A lot of their meetings, they talk about they'd like to see the dividend used for economic development. But yeah, there's no limitation on our use of those monies.
I'll defer to Ms. Spiros again.
Spiros?
I just do recall, though, when I attended the meeting, the committee that talked about these dividends and how much they were going to pay and stuff like that, there was concern that if this money was spent on, you know, just to plug holes in your budget, I mean, Nick did express concerns as well as other people expressed concerns that could be looked upon by the utility, is it PCO? How do you say that? I don't even know. But whoever regulates them, that could be looked at, and we could actually have to give that money back. And we are right at the top in the state of Wisconsin. We receive more from our utility than almost every other single city. And I don't know, we might even be number one at this point. So that scrutiny is there, that if you're using that money just to plug holes in your budget, there's more of a chance that they will frown upon that and ask us to pay it back. At least that's how I interpreted what Nick explained in those meetings.
Yeah, the premise was that, you know, that made them sign on to this arrangement was that this is supposedly below the line income. In other words, it's not income from normal operations. It's from the ATC dividend, it's some investment earnings. But you're right, they have made it clear that as that number grows, and this last year it's higher, it's close to $500,000, they still have some concern that might attract Public Service Commission attention and some scrutiny. But at this point, again, supposedly they're not giving us any money that's above the line income from normal operations. So we're treating it as such.
Right, and that's a very fair point that Ms. Spiros makes, and I'd agree with that. However, I guess my concern is that we don't have someone from the utility here to be able to, you know, state as such. And in my short time on council and on this board as well, the information coming from the utility has been murky at times, where they'll say something, but I'm not entirely sure it doesn't track. So if that's the case, I'd probably be more comfortable approving this once we know for sure exactly where that utility requirement stands.
I think they're going to consistently say that they would like the money ideally. Their preference would be that it be used for economic development, because what they hope to see those monies do is generate new business and industry, paying water fees, paying electric fees, and those kind of things. But they recognize that they really don't have that direct hold to require that. I think that's kind of at least in my mind, that's where we've come down to.
Right, and so their desires are one thing, but I'd be more concerned with the authority that actually requires that, the PSC and everything else. So they could want us to spend it on painting City Hall pink for all I care, but just because they want that doesn't mean we need to do that. That being said, if there's an authority or the PSC or something else is going to potentially hold our feet to the fire and something like that, I'd like to know that, and I'd like to know the authority that's causing that, or what's dictating that behavior, as opposed to us just, you know, trying to remember back a full year ago. I can barely remember what happened last weekend.
Ms. Spiros?
Well, this was, I mean, we had many meetings about this. This wasn't a full council. So Andrew, that may be why you are not sure of these conversations. I think Natasha was on that utility committee. I'm not sure, Brian, were you on that? But I know Steve was there, and it was pretty clear. I mean, we spent a lot of time discussing this, and it was very, very evident that they were more comfortable with this being spent on economic development. They did not want the Public Commission of Utilities or whoever they are coming back and saying, we're going to have to pay that back because we used it to, you know, fill in shortcomings in our general budget. And he didn't mince words about it. We discussed it for a very long time. So if Natasha can chime in, I know she was at the meetings. I'm not sure if Brian was or not. I don't remember.
Yeah, I was at all the meetings, and I know exactly what you're saying. They were pretty evident and pretty wanted this to be the economic development money. Whether or not it has to be, but they were pretty evident that that's where it's supposed to go. They didn't want us to get noticed by the PFC.
And again, I may be repeating myself, but they ran this by their legal counsel, and their legal counsel felt similarly. But again, in adopting the new policy, they rested on the fact that their understanding from their legal counsel was if it was below the line, not normal operational revenues, they could provide it as a dividend to the city. But again, if the Utilities Commission and you're thinking, we don't want to attract attention, we don't want to be noticed in Madison, and what if the dividend gets to be a higher and higher number? Their preference would be that they can tell the Public Service Commission that the monies are by and large being used to further economic development, which would fit with their mission to some degree in terms of, again, creating more utility customers. But again, in signing on to that agreement, my understanding was, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody who was in those meetings, that they felt that as long as it was below the line revenue, that was something that they could provide to the city of Marshfield.
Right, there is not statutory guidance provided for this sort of dividend payment like there is for the pilot payment, which is the payment in lieu of taxes. So that's, just maybe to answer your question, there isn't a legal responsibility or authority that says they have to pay us this dividend. It's a policy that has been in place for many years, many years.
So then what's this nefarious threat of PSC then?
I think the concern is that if we're submitting for a rate case, if Marshfield Utilities is asking to increase the electric or water charges by 5 or 6%, that somebody reviewing that rate request is going to say, well, wait a minute, maybe if you hadn't given $300,000 to the city of Marshfield, you'd be able to not need a 5% rate increase. And I get that. And like I said, I think they don't want to attract attention down in Madison. But once again, I'll say it one more time, they seem to feel confident at the time from their attorney that if they weren't using money from normal operating revenue to give to the city as part of some sort of a dividend, that they could claim that it wasn't affecting rate cases, wasn't affecting normal operations to the degree that would be inappropriate. That was my understanding after all the conversations, but I know that they've continued to make it clear that their preference, and I'm going to call it preference, would be that money is largely used to further economic development in some way.
To be blunt, I really don't care what they want. That'd be for us to decide, not for them. I guess the follow-up question to that would be, why we're not directing this money to the 205 fund when we passed it in July? Was it just a simple oversight? I mean, that happens. I'm not trying to be critical of it, but it seems to me that it's a little disjointed.
You're wondering what wasn't directly placed in the 205 fund rather than general fund?
Right, when we changed the policy last year.
Well, yeah, and I think at that time there was a thought, and maybe others who were in those meetings can chime in, the thought was that it was available to us for normal operations, which it technically is.
Right.
But again, we're looking at it now, we look at what we've spent so far in 2024. It's been for facade grants, it's been for, a Main Street Mackey and other things. And I think the thought is if we're using it primarily for economic development, maybe we just put it in that fund. And as Rebecca said, if we want to draw $30 or $40 or $50,000 out of it for a project, at least it will require the council to look at it and say, well, it's got some tie to economic development. But again, that's your call. That's totally and completely the call of our elected officials, including yourself.
No, and once again, just to repeat myself, I agree with Ms. Spiros on the oversight part, that there's no disagreement with me on that part. My concern is that years from now, we make a decision right now for this policy, but years from now down the road, we get a very lean year where we might need to use it for ops or something like that. And now we put ourselves in a corner where we can't use it for ops. Not anything immediate, far from it, but I'm thinking of something that's unexpected that happens down the line. So much like we're standing right now with all of a sudden that settlement with the clinic, that was somewhat unanticipated. And it put us in a bind. I'm not saying right now, not saying this year, not saying next, not the following, but I'm saying down the line, it reduces our flexibility.
I'm going to be very blunt here. We've maybe hinted at this before, but if you didn't give $1 to any of the people who are asking for it, some of whom are here in the audience, and you were wondering how the city would use that dividend money, I mean, believe me, in a $26 million general fund budget, we have so much that ties to economic development, some salaries of people who work here, some other costs that we incur that it wouldn't be hard to argue that they tie to economic development. So I'm not afraid that we would ever need to be fudging and trying to say, well, we're using it to, I use fill potholes as an example, but the need is there. The dollars are spent on economic development somewhere anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any other questions? All right, I just have one question. Mrs. Slensky, if it is undesignated in our general fund, does that cause any problems with our Moody's rating?
Undesignated does not cause issues with Moody's. It's when we begin to restrict it in the general fund where it appears to decrease our liquidity. So if you wanted to keep this kind of earmarked for economic development within the general fund in years where we had an unanticipated revenue, and if you wanted to earmark that with a restriction, that would then decrease our liquidity measure in our Moody's rating.
So when I hear both sides of the argument, one side is that if we put it into a special fund, it'll just be cleaner and us knowing how we're spending it. But the other side of the argument is if it's just in the general fund, it gives us a little more flexibility. I mean, both agree. All right. Okay.
For the record, Mr. Bark has changed my mind.
For the record, Mr. Burns changed his mind. All right.
I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not.
We're about to find out.
All right. So we, at the moment, have a motion by Ms. Spiros and a second by Mr. Varsho, and that is to recommend this new policy for council approval. So I think we're done with discussion and questions. So all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, that motion passes.
Thank you.
Okay. Item number 11, request to recommend council approval of a 3-month extension of the agreement with Cedar Corporation for Economic Development Services through December 31st, 2024, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you very much. We'll obviously take these two items separate because they are separate agenda items, but they have a tie, and that is the continuing struggle we have to get community development or development services staff on board. And they both relate to the community development director and senior planner positions that are still vacant. We are continuing to work on that. We are hoping to kick off another round of that right around the 1st of October. Trying not to wear out the market, but we're still in the fourth quarter going to be actively looking to fill those two important positions in that department. However, having said that, we have a need for at least some temporary services from people in both planning and economic development. We've been working with Cedar Corporation, getting the opportunity to work with Josh Miller, who certainly knows us really well. That relationship has been over a year now, and I'd like to continue that for another 3-month period through December 31st, 2024, with the understanding that if we get deeper into the fourth quarter and it becomes apparent that we're not going to be able to get a staff position, maybe we talk about other alternatives or other options, possibly even looking at another RFP for services and maybe reframing it. But for right now, with all the things we have going on, in terms of we're finishing up Weinbrenner, but we've got a lot of TIF things happening and whatnot, we really do need somebody in that position. The contract proposal that you have before you is continuing the same rate for Josh's services, $140 an hour, get him up to about 10 hours a week. And I would request that the committee recommend council approval for the extension through fourth quarter.
All right, do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? All right, seeing none, please vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 That motion passes. Item number 12, request to recommend council approval of a 3-month extension of the agreement with SEH Incorporated for planning-related services through December 31st, 2024, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you very much. This is a companion one. This involves SEH, and that is the services of Bryce Hembrook, our former city planner. And as with Josh Miller of Cedar, he works for us roughly 10 hours a week, does plan commission. He'll be with us later tonight online with that meeting, handles a lot of planning and zoning and those types of matters for us during the hours that he works for the city. We've been with them for a while now since we lost our last planner. Same thing, I'd like to extend this through the end of 2024 with the understanding that if it does not appear that we're able to find a position of senior planner to be able to hire, we may want to talk about other options. But again, this has been just an absolute blessing for us to get somebody who knows the city of Marshfield, and Bryce knows as well. So with that in mind, it's the same terms as before, no change in hourly rate or anything else. I would request a committee recommending council approval of a fourth quarter extension with SEH.
Move to approve.
Second.
Right, we have a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? Right, seeing that, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Right, that passes. Number 13, request to recommend council approval of a one-year extension of the existing lease with Weinbrenner Shoe Company Incorporated through December 31st, 2025, presented by Steve Bard, City Administrator.
Thank you. Well, as you know, we have signed an agreement with Weinbrenner. They'll be building in our business park. That's a wonderful thing. We did have a lease that we signed with them in late 2020, a 5-year, I'll call it a 5-year lease. It was really a 3-year lease from January 1, 2021 through December 31st of 2023, but it also included 2 one-year extensions. The first one for 2024, unilaterally, that could be entered into by Weinbrenner. We had no choice on that. Late 2023, they notified us that they wanted to continue through 2024. They got that extension. The rent continues to increase slightly during that time, but it wasn't one that needed our approval. The 5th year, as I'll call it, for 2025, does require approval by the council. So they're asking for a continuation of that agreement, the second of the 2-year extensions, the second of the 1-year extensions, I should say, through calendar year 2025. No change in the terms except the rent will increase as already provided for in the original lease. Their plan right now is to begin construction in October. So, I mean, hopefully fairly soon. Hopefully that's going to happen that way, with the goal of being done with the new facility by November 30th of 2025. Just to put a note in for you, they may be asking to extend the lease a little bit into the first quarter of 2026 because even though their new facility will be done by the end of November 2025, just getting out of that facility, making the transition, they may look for a little bit of grace on that one. But for right now, this is a request for extending for 1 year through 2025 the current lease, and the staff would recommend that this committee recommend council approval.
Do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Do we have any questions or discussion? Right, seeing none, please vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Number 14. Steve, you're up for the next 2 ones as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Request.
I'm just getting warmed up, right? No,
Request
just kidding.
Review, request.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll read it just for the people watching. Request to review requests for the 2025 city budget under Fund 205 Economic Development and make recommendations to the council. Presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
I'm very sorry about jumping in. I'm just on a roll here, apparently. Yeah, you've had the last 2 meetings, you've had presentations by several groups looking to get funds from the, as we call it, the 205 Economic Development Fund in the 2025 budget. And again, just a reminder, this is a very different process than past years because the Economic Development Board has been disbanded. They normally were the group that would review and make recommendations on what to include in the 205 fund budget based upon, what they heard in presentations. That now falls upon this committee to make a recommendation to the council. Your memo highlights the half a dozen groups that have been asking for funds. If you total the requests, they come up to $220,000. I will note again that that does include $37,000 for the position that is occupied by Nikki Anderson. We have an agreement that runs through the end of next year with Visit Marshfield Park Recreation and the City Economic Development Fund to fund that position. 40% from this fund, 40% from Visit Marshfield, and 20% from the city's Park and Recreation budget. The others are some of them that we've done in the past, but they're all looking for funding again for 2025. I did put in your memo just a reminder of how this works. So now that we have this change in how the dividend is provided to us from utilities, we're not really going to be sure exactly how much we're going to get every year. Historically, it's been in that $225,000, $250,000 up to $300,000 range. For this year, 2024, we're getting $492,000. We've already received it, I believe. But the way the new formula is computed, that could go down, that could go up, that could do all sorts of things. And we can't count on it being close to $500,000 next year. However, having said that, the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee and the council ultimately can recommend whatever funding level you want, because beyond the money that comes in from the dividend, you could allocate, if you wanted to, a portion of the existing budget, or fund, a budget that is in that fund. So I do want to note a couple of other things that are not in, that would be in consideration for the 205 fund that are not listed in this list of requests you've received. One of them is the money we spend every year on what used to be called the facade grant program, now renamed the Building Revitalization Grant Program. We've historically contributed $60,000 to $70,000 to that program, done it for over a decade now. I think it might have been a year or two when we backed off a little bit. And again, that's a grant that we provide for people to leverage money to get them to fix up the interior and exterior of their building. So that's not included in 205 money that is being requested because it's not coming from the groups that approach you. We also have the prospect of putting money toward the Vanderwall Phase 2. We've had the West 2nd Street redevelopment project going on. Now with the Weinbrenner relocation and the apparent move of the police station down to the south end, it does make the prospect of developing that part of downtown from the post office to the west a little bit more prominent, a little bit more hopeful. And if we want to contribute money toward the second phase of that and consulting services, that would presumably come from this fund as well. So, hopefully all that makes sense. I put the 2024 economic development budget, the one that was adopted that you've been working on or working with this year, in your packet. It does include several of the applications that you have before you. Again, Mackey, Main Street, the Wenzel Family Plaza contribution toward the coordinator's wages and benefits, little money towards city communications, and then, as I mentioned, the facade grant in West 2nd Street project. My hope from this discussion is that you're able to maybe talk a little bit about what you saw and heard from the presentations and the written materials, maybe give a sense of where you want to go with this. If a decision is made tonight on what level of recommendation and for what purposes you're ready to go with, send it to the council for 2020, 4th of September, that's great. If you don't make a decision tonight, but you want some more information or you want to, talk more about how to frame your ultimate budget for the 205 fund, we can do that on October 1st. But hopefully you'll get some good discussion here on where you want to take the request and the opportunities that you have in front of you for that fund.
All right, so this is discretion of the council, so I'm going to open it up to discussion.
Mr. Bard, are you looking for what specific action tonight? Just discussion amongst ourselves, or a vote yea or nay on each individual one, or just in general?
Looking ahead, in just a few weeks, we're going to be talking about the budget as a whole. And ideally, I'd like to have this one settled in advance, which would mean this meeting or the next meeting, so that, first of all, these folks would like to know what to expect, those who were here and others who made presentations. But if you're able to come down tonight and say, yeah, I want to fund this one, I want to fund this one, I don't think we're going to have enough money to fund that one, I also want to do facade grants. If you're able to put a package together, that's fine. Right now, staff is estimating that the dividend to be $300,000. That might be conservative, but we have no idea. And then, as I said, you're able, if you want to draw upon some of the existing fund balance if you want to go beyond that. But if you can frame it tonight and come up with a package that you want to recommend to the council for the 205 fund budget, have at it. That's where I want to end up from this body.
All right, so I'm just going to frame this discussion. If there are items that you would like to keep, then let's make that clear, and then we can discuss that. If there's items that you want to change, let's make that clear as well. Mr. Marshall.
So out of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, can you explain to me which ones, you got the nonprofit sheet in here? You got the nonprofit, what do we got in here? The City of Marshfield procedures. Which one of these, are these nonprofits?
Well, I mean, I guess, the pickleball community, although they're doing this project on behalf of the city, Chamber Foundation, Main Street Marshfield, Child Caring Inc. Would be your nonprofits, I think, from among the list. Because the city communications department and the contribution to Wenzel Family Plaza clearly are not.
Correct. Okay. Because it would be nice to know what obviously we funded the Mackey Business Development Director for years, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And the coordinator position is in there. Have we done Main Street marketing? Main Street Marshfield, those marketing and planters for years or no?
Every year, Main Street Marshfield has brought a different request. We've always looked at it. I think we've generally given them at least something.
Okay.
But the committee and the EDB and ultimately the council have looked at, is this a good use, planters versus benches versus programming or whatever. But typically, we've given them some amount of money.
Right, so the council as a whole has shied away from giving nonprofits any money this year. And at least 2 years ago, I know we cut the budget for the Civic Band and any other nonprofits that were asking for money. We did that a couple of years ago, remember?
Yeah, that policy was actually passed in 2018 that set up a procedure for them to apply. It was no longer automatic. We used to have just routine automatics for Civic Band and Up a Mansion. And now they had to demonstrate, and I think many of the people who've applied this year have indicated what the project need is, what the benefit is, kind of following the format of that policy. But
Right.
yeah, things changed about 5 or 6 years ago.
Right, and it's, I understand the policy and stuff, and they keep talking, everybody comes in and says, it's gonna be great for the city, we'll have a lot of people in the hotels and heads and beds and this and that, but hotel room tax, city gets 30%. Visit Marshfield gets 70. So it's, how much of is it benefiting the city or is it benefiting Visit Marshfield? And why are we getting the requests and they are not getting the request for any money? So,
Well, and I think, I don't know if this has happened or not, but I think the pickleball group was going to meet with Visit Marshfield. Has that occurred yet?
that's
Next Tuesday. Making that ask based upon exactly what you're saying, the economic impact has in beds and just having tournaments, and hopefully they'll see fit to make a good contribution.
okay.
I do want to add one more thing that I should have said in my presentation. I put on your desks tonight a sheet from one of the quarterly reports I get from Karen Olson. I know, Vice Chair, you mentioned that last meeting I wasn't here, I was on vacation, but wanting to get a better idea of what the deliverables and the projects would be that Mackey Foundation would do through this position. I talked about that a little bit with Denise. We don't have that right now. We think if you funded that program, we would do a memorandum of understanding. And I just wanted you to see for tonight some of the things that Karen does on a regular basis, get a sense of what some of the business retention and whatnot are, because we would definitely want council involvement in terms of how that would be phrased. In other words, what are the kind of deliverables that you'd be looking for that we can help meld into what that document looks like? What are your hot buttons as far as what you expect from that business development director position?
Ms. Spiros?
I'm sorry, did you call on me?
I did.
Okay, I just have a little hard time. So, I just want to, I guess I'm going to just voice my own opinion on this list. I'm going to go down the list. The Marshfield area pickleball community, I don't see us giving them any more money. We've put a lot of money into that. I think that they're a little bit short and they can try to get that from another source. I think it's a great project. Don't get me wrong. I think all of this stuff is really great, but we are working with a really, really, really tough budget. And I know people get sick and tired of hearing that, but we're also working with levy limits and low net new construction. And there's just a lot of things that, have occurred in the last few years that have made our budget extremely tight, including losing a significant portion of tax revenue from the Marshfield Clinic. So personally, I would say no to the pickleball request. The Marshfield Area Chamber Foundation position, I do think that's an important position. I would like to see a little bit more as far as reporting and things like that, and what the return on investment really is for that position. I know we're under a commitment for the Wenzel Family Plaza coordinator position, but essentially we fund 60% of that, if I'm not mistaken, because 40% is 20% comes from Parks and Rec, with our 40% added. I would prefer to see that be more of a 50-50 split, but I probably won't die on that hill today. Main Street Marshfield, I don't mind paying for the planters, but I don't agree with paying for billboards and things like that. I don't think that they have very much value. And the city communications department, I think, should charge for videos that they're doing for partner agencies rather than having the taxpayers pick those up. And the child caring Inc., I would say no to.
All right, thank you.
That's it.
This is, yes, Mr. Rigel.
Okay, two things that I just want to preface this with. I think there were two homework items that we had mentioned last meeting after these presentations. One from the pickleball group as far as the meeting with Visit Marshfield. And I know they just said earlier today that they're going to be meeting with them next Tuesday. And then the other one was from Mackie, and I know we had requested some, words are failing me, benchmarks or
Measurables.
thank you, measurables. So I think the pickleball group kind of answered that already. Did Mackie come up with any measurables at this point that they could share, or any ideas pushing one or the other, or no?
Denise, do you want to come to the podium?
Yeah, while they come up, that's what I briefly discussed with Denise today, coming up with a list of things, but we wanted a little bit of your input along the way, but go ahead.
Is it on? Okay. Good evening. So we gave you what CARE currently gives you. I would like feedback from you guys, though, as to what you guys are looking for. I think that'll help us guide to come up with the MOU. So that's what we're seeking, is some feedback of what you guys would like to see. You know, what you have now is what we've been giving every quarter to Steve whenever we submit our payment. I don't know if that is what you're looking for. I guess we're looking for direction from you guys as to what you would like to see.
All right, so I'll open that up to the committee. Does anyone have measurables off the top of their head that they would like to see? Mr. Rigel.
The first thing I would say is that I am not in the business of Chamber of Commerce. I'm not an expert in that field. So my fear of me handing down measurables would be out of a place of ignorance. So I think that if Mackie's able to, you know, educate at least me on what valuable metrics would be and why each metric has value, that'd be better. I mean, I can sit here and spit off a bunch of measurables, but they could just be nothing. And I don't have a frame of reference, so I'd have to defer to the expert on that. And kind of similar with this report here, much of this, albeit good, to me is Greek, mainly because, once again, I'm not in that business, so I don't know what value each thing does. And I know this is kind of what came first, the chicken or the egg. We don't know which one is first, but I think a starting point would be, look, these are some metrics that we can look at as far as the value that's being provided by Mackie, and then explain what each one means. And then we could go, okay, that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad. Because my fear here is that we're going to be giving out measurables or metrics and they're going to just fall flat and measure nothing.
Oh, yes, please come. Karen.
Thank you. I would just like to comment on what you said, Mr. Rigel. And I think we had been talking with Steve about bringing somebody in from the state, the Economic Development Group, and also Synergy, which is our regional group. And I think that would be really good to educate. And we work so closely with them in everything that we do. So a lot of what you're seeing in these reports are what they expect, what they do. We do it on that local level. So I think the education part is a big one. I think part of it has been we haven't reported out to you guys because we were going through EDB. You certainly deserve that. So I think we could easily come up with some good measurables and things that could be reported back to you in a timely manner. Just wanted to add that.
How much time do you think you'd need to come up with those? I'm just trying to stay in the same timeline that Mr. Barr was talking about previously.
You know, I could work with them and come up with something and present it back to you in a fairly quickly time frame. I didn't know if you would rather have them come in person and talk about some of that, but you just want me to work with them and come up with some things. Happy to do that I think I could do that in a week if they're not out of the area or something.
Yeah, I'll speak for myself, but I think either one of those would be a good option. And if it's able to be as quick of a turnaround as in 1 or 2 weeks,
sure,
it might be wonderful for a presentation 2 weeks for that. as far as us to understand what we should be looking at as far as metrics go.
All right. Karen, I would just say that for myself, I think one of our highest priorities is to bring new businesses from outside of Marshfield into both our business and our industrial parks. So to me, that would be the absolute highest priority that I can see, and having measurables on that task.
Sure.
Of these are, I will report how many people I've talked to, how many people I've, just giving those reports to me would be the most I would be, that's what I'm looking for measurables. All right, so Ms. Spiros.
Yeah, I agree with Natasha. I think the most important thing to me also is seeing new businesses, and especially those that would occupy our industrial parks, that would employ a significant number of people. Small businesses are great, but I would be looking more for that, and what opportunities presented and which opportunities we weren't successful at getting. And, hopefully we can look over those and determine why we weren't successful and make changes. I think that's an important thing for us to know. So I agree with what Ms. Tompkins said.
So would it be okay with the committee if we table the discussion for Mackey until we have Steve and Mackey will meet and come up with sort of an MOU with measurables that then we would have presented to us? Is that okay with it? Okay, great. So I think what we're going to do is go item by item. Otherwise, it's going to be really confusing trying to have this discussion. And I don't think we're at a point where we can do a consent for the entire thing. Obviously, we just took one thing off. So the first one on here is pickleball. So we've heard from Ms. Spiros, and I can look for a motion, or we can ask for a tabling or a deferment. So does anyone else have any discussion about the pickleball?
I'd like to table this one until we hear what the Visit Marshall meeting comes after they meet with Visit Marshall.
All right, Mr. Reigel, do you have anything?
No, I agree. I think that's fairly sensible.
All right, so we will wait and have that come back for after the meeting with Visit Marshfield. Okay, we are on to Main Street. The request for Main Street. Any discussion, any desire for action on that?
I agree with Mrs. Spiros. We don't need to be paying for the marketing or the billboards, but the planters I'm okay with doing for that.
Does anyone remember in that budget how much was billboards?
Well, yeah, I looked at a minute ago, and it's $10,000 for the planters, and then the marketing piece is broken up into pieces. There's a billboard piece and a lot of other pieces. Are you saying, just broadly speaking, you don't want to see anything from the marketing piece, or just certain parts of it? And I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but I pull it up again.
I'd have to go back and look at it then if we're going to split that out and look at it piece by piece.
Yeah, just to say out loud for a minute, there's pieces that are website development, branding, photography, billboards, marketing grant, window clings, social media ads. So it's that $20,000 is broken up into pieces. I just wanted to see if you're talking about the whole $20,000 that you don't want to fund, or just parts of it. And if you want to look at that later, you can do that as well.
Ms. Spiros?
My preference is to pay $10,000 for the planters. I did ask our city streets department if that was something that they could take under their wing, but they did not think that they could do that. So I would be willing to do $10,000 for the planters, and that's it.
Any other, Mr. Reigel?
I'll be the odd man out here. I do support the full amount. I mean, as far as any organization goes, they're very, very responsible with their money. Sitting on the bid board and seeing what they detail out every single meeting, it's impressive how well they balance their budget and with the limited funds that they have. That being said, the marketing they have, although it might seem extravagant, they do have some pretty good numbers on there for like, for example, we're talking billboards. That's a cut rate price that they have. We might be impervious to the allure of billboards, but other people are not. So I do not think that that's an outlandish request. especially coming from the 205 fund for the work that Main Street does.
And again, what are we going to be bringing this back then in 2 weeks individually to vote on each individual one, or?
No, I get the impression we're going to end up bringing it back as a package, but there'll be information on 2 or 3 items specifically that you want to delve into, the follow-up on Mackey and pickleball and those kind of things.
Okay.
But I still appreciate getting a sense of where you're at in general. That'll help us with budget planning as well. If you know how you feel about the other remaining requests, it'd be good to have a consensus.
Steve, do we need to vote on this as a package? Because I think we have differing opinions.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it any way you want to. You could say yes to these 2 and no to these 2, and then only follow up on the ones that you wanted more information, or you can treat it as an entire package for October 1st. Your call.
I think if we voted on separate things, it would be more efficient than having to go through this entire discussion again. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. You might be right.
All right, so we're still on Main Street. I would just like to give my opinion on this, that the marketing for this is not for Main Street marketing. They help businesses with their marketing. So the photos, remember, they had the picture of the jeweler who was redoing their website. They had the picture of the senior craft shop with the dowel closed. So, and then the Klingons were for empty storefronts to put things up there so it didn't look bad downtown. So I think the marketing that they're doing is quite targeted to help support the downtown, give it a sense of vitality. And so I too would actually want to approve the full dollar amount for Main Street. All right, Mr. Rigel.
So just for thinking forward here, is this going to rear its head again during budget discussions?
Any member of the council who wants to pull it off certainly can. I mean, you've got a council member here today who's not on the committee, and others will hear about this decision. They could certainly want to use it in other ways. And we've talked about the fact that there could be uses that tie to the city's operations in general that we could use some of those monies for if we wanted to. So it'll just be your recommendation. You'll be recommending saying, look, here's how we want the money used, A, B, C, and D, the same way as you make any other recommendation to the full council.
Right, but if this is coming up during budget discussions, we're essentially going line item on here. And what I don't want to do is have us invest.
No, I'd like to have it settled before then. I mean, if nothing else, you make a recommendation as a package on October 1st, and the council at the beginning of the budget process says this is what, I don't want us to be talking about this on October 29th or something, in the middle of all the other things we're trying to finalize. It'd be nice to get this piece out of the way. And sooner the better. I mean, it'd be great if we could do it tonight, but it sounds like we're not going to because of a couple of pieces that are still hanging.
So basically, if we have some consensus, that would be great. And then our consensus is a recommendation.
Yep, correct.
Do we have any sort of consensus on Main Street? We have 2 people who don't, or we've got 10,000. Ms. Spiros?
Yeah, so just in reference even to what Natasha said, they're taking pictures and they're advertising for private businesses, and you're asking taxpayers to pick and choose which private businesses they're going to help contribute marketing for. Now, these are businesses in our downtown. They're small businesses. I love small businesses, but I don't think it's the responsibility of the taxpayers to do their marketing for them. We don't contribute to other businesses outside of downtown. We don't contribute to marketing for, Hotel Marshfield. We don't contribute for marketing for Wheeler Chevrolet. We don't do that. And so I don't think it's the job of the taxpayers to pay for private businesses marketing. So again, I mean, there just has to be a better way than to try to come and get all of this money all the time from the taxpayers.
Mr. Rigel.
Looking at the time here, I think we've bitten off more than we can chew today again. I would table this entire discussion for the next meeting, hopefully having a lighter agenda. We can move on and discuss the closed session item and whatever the next one is. The city attorney.
All right. Is that okay with everyone? That is okay with me.
Yes.
Can I just add one thing as you get ready for that next discussion? Again, remember the other two pieces I mentioned, specifically the facade grants. We're not obligated to do the facade grant program. We've done it in the past. Sometimes the money is used, sometimes only part of the money is used. So keep that in mind as to whether you want to fund that and at what level. And then again, the possibility of a consultant, which we'll be talking to the council about next Tuesday on the West 2nd Street. And yeah, we can. I think that's a very good recommendation on your part to fold it in. I've got some comments today that will help me, and we've got follow-up with Mackie and pickleball to do.
So Steve, when you bring this back to the packet, could you add those two items and the estimated cost? That would be helpful as well. Thank
Absolutely.
And it wasn't, 1 second, I wasn't sure what Mrs. Spiro said about the last one. I can't remember what she said, but you can remove the childcare right off of there. In my opinion, it's not something that I don't think that the city should fund that.
And I go back to something that you said earlier, Natasha, that I really agreed with. If there's an item or two that you don't want to see on there, I mean, it'd be nice to even deal with it now, and that'd be one less thing you'll have to look at on the first. If there's consensus. If there's not consensus, I get it.
Yeah, so do you want to make a motion about that? Or
Well, when they bring it back, it's a consensus. I believe Mrs. Spiro said that she wasn't interested in doing that. And mine is, and if you and Mr. Rigel agree with that, then he just doesn't put it on the next meeting. We don't have to really make a motion of this is a discussion.
You should have a motion if that's the direction you're going to go.
All right, I will move to remove the childcare from the next meeting when you bring this back to us.
do we have a second? We have a second. Any discussion or comments for that motion? I would just say before I call the vote, just I understand how important childcare is, and I do believe that it is important for our sense of, it's that sense of place of people wanting to move in here. But we are at a point in the city where funding nonprofits is tricky ground for us that we have not figured out. And I don't think we're in the place right now to fund nonprofits. I would love to fund it, and I would love for us to figure out a mechanism to do that. So I would agree. Okay, so now we are going to vote on that. So all in favor to remove this from the requested items, please say aye.
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 All right, so that motion carries. Okay, Ms. Spiros?
I would make a motion to remove the $15,000 from the city's communications department videos for partner agencies. I think that if we're doing videos for another agency, that we should be charging for those.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion or questions? I just have a clarification question, Mr. Barg. Is it just they are doing this for other, like Main Street, or are they doing it for Mackie?
I think they do it for both Main Street and Mackie, yeah.
Okay,
Highlighting new businesses and so forth.
all right. Okay, so any more discussions or questions? All right, so please vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, any opposed? All right. Any other motions for that list before we go on to the next item?
Thank you, that was very helpful input tonight. I appreciate it.
Oh, Mr. Rigel.
One thing, I think just out of overabundance of caution, the one that we do have under commitment, we're keeping it on. So I don't know if we need to formalize that for you, Mr. Barg, but that's kind of a non-starter.
If you'd like, I can separate that out.
Well, I was just wondering, just
No,
so
but
it's not
that's
on-
true. That will narrow the field of what you need to make final decisions on. I mean, we honestly, for the next year, are supposed to do that as we go into 2026. You know, there'll have to be a discussion on that, but yeah.
Right, and so I was just trying to, once again, minimize the topics that we have to cover in the next meeting.
Yeah, I took from, and from Rebecca's comments earlier, that this may be a good thing to look at for 2026 as this 4-year understanding with Visit Marshfield and the Park and Rec and EDB comes to an end. But if you don't, unless you're going to want to veer from that, I'll just take that off and we'll assume that one's being covered. Okay, I see heads nodding.
All right, great. I'm going to move on to the next item. So number 15, discussing securing city attorney services for the period starting January 1st, 2000, 25, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you. Well, I'll just start out by saying that this is one of those services like many others we do here, auditing, accounting, or whatever, that there is no specific requirement that we do an RFP every 3 years or 5 years or 7 years or any particular time. It's up to you. Periodically, it's a good thing to look and find out what other services are out there, what fees they're charging, and whether or not it's something you want to pursue. The last time we actually did a request for proposals for city attorney services was back in 2017. That was for a contract that started with 1/1/18. At that time, we had 2 proposals. We stayed with Wolfram, Gamoki, and Hutchinson. A couple of years later, we elected not to do an RFP and just negotiate a new 2-year agreement with Wolfram. We did that again in 2022. So it's been 6 or 7 years since the last time we did a request for proposal. I bring it to your attention whether you're willing to have us continue. We certainly are satisfied with Mr. Wolfram's services, but there's other attorneys out there. Is it your direction that we continue to work with Mr. Wolfram and negotiate a new contract for 1/1/25 and beyond, or that we go out for proposals this year?
All right, Ms. Spiros.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make a motion that we go ahead and seek a new contract with Wolfram and Gamoki.
I second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any questions or discussion? All right, we're going to vote then. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, motion passes. Great. Question, number 16, adjourn to closed session under Wisconsin statutes, chapter 19.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. This is about the renewal of contracts with the Marshfield Medical Center. I will need a motion and a second.
I move to go into closed session.
Mr. Rigel motions, Ms. Spiros seconds. We will need a roll call for that.
Mr. Rigel,
Aye.
Mr. Varsho,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiros,
Yes.
Mrs. Tompkins.
Yes.
We'd be in big trouble without her. Oh, nothing.
Are we good? All right, we are reconvening into open session. We are on item 18 on the agenda. We have no action to take. Item 19, suggested items for future agenda. Does anyone have any suggested items? Okay, I have one suggested item. I would like us to look at whether any of our costs for the UW could come under the 205 fund, because it falls under the training and the investment in people for business and our things. So just to see if any of that would follow. Okay. No other items?
Move to approve.
I'll move to adjourn.
Okay, we got to move to adjourn. Any seconds?
Yes, I second.
All right, we have a second.
I don't even know what I was thinking.
Okay. The meeting is adjourned.
Demands of its customers.